All right, so for housekeeping, if you would like captions, closed captioning is with the little button there that says CC. Again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you would like American Sign Language, please pin the person that says ASL, Adam and Kristen Gasper. They are doing the lovely ASL interpretation for us. Y para español, usa tu teléfono y llama 312-626-6799 y su código es 848-767-54800. So that's also on the slide here if you're like, what did they just say? But that number will get you to the Spanish line. And once again, just for how the first session went, Q&A is going to be at the end, but if there are questions that are answered mid-session, Julia and or Mary will be sure to read out the question just to make sure everyone is able to hear it. And if you do have any questions or need any assistance technical-wise, please contact sphcollaboratory@uic.edu. So let's get started. Just for the goals of the session, we're hoping to once again share best practices in RFP grant applications, share common mistakes in RFP and grant applications, and the ideal audience for this space is nonprofits that have been applied or that have applied or have been declined from city RFPs and grants. But I'm going to pass it over to Julia and Mary. Oops, sorry. There you go.
Thank you so much, Bea. And Mary, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself. So excited to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm at Julia Talbot. I work at the Department of Family and Support Services here at the City of Chicago. My job primarily is to be the manager of the request for proposal or RFP process here at DFSS. Under that, we do about between 20 and 30 RFPs every year. I look at about a little over 1,000 applications every year. I don't evaluate them all, but I do look them. And mostly what I do is make sure that things go out in a timely manner, that we are as transparent as a city department as we can be, and that things stick to time, and that you as an applicant have the support, are directed to the appropriate resources, and have as good an experience with your RFP application process as possible. I see I'm joined here in the chat with some coworkers. I'm thrilled that they are here as well, and encourage them to hop on if they have anything to add to what I'm going to say here. Pardon? So to get started with these best practices, we're looking at, understanding exactly what the city is looking for, following directions, writing good responses. And so the first thing, I think we can go to the next slide at this point. The first thing is this: understand exactly what the city department is looking for. And I think the unstated best practice that I would like to really try to drive home to the people, you guys listening, is to really look at to read the RFP and understand what the city is looking for, and understand and making sure that that aligns with your organization's mission and where you want to go. Ideally, the mission of your organization is going to align with what we are looking for. And if there are significant discrepancies, I do encourage people to proceed with caution. I have worked for the city long enough that I have seen city or governmental contracts sort of inadvertently kill or maim, those are strong words, maim an organization. I understand that telling people not to chase money is a pretty privileged argument at this point, but at the same time, know what you're signing yourself up for. City contracts, and as I think mentioned this morning, your average delegate contract is somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000. So city contracts are a pretty nice chunk of change, but we are not a particularly flexible funder. We have a high administrative burden to our contracts. And so when we say understand exactly what the city department is looking for, I want you to understand that there's always that push-pull between an applicant or a provider organization and a funding source in terms of like who's more important. Everybody thinks they're more important. The organization's like, but I have this mission and I'm doing my mission, and the mission's the most important thing. And then the funder's like, yeah, whatever. Like, we just want you to do what we want you to do. We're the boss. And so there's always that push and pull. But understand, like, we can't get the stuff done without you. So you do have some voice, but at the same time, if your mission is more than half a standard deviation from whatever it is we want, we're not going to change. So understand what you're getting in bed with. In my department, I think that's also compounded by the fact that we're about 85% non-City of Chicago funds funded. So that means that for the most part, you can depend on our money coming from a state or federal agency, and every governmental agency that touches a dollar impact or imparts its own philosophy, its own culture, its own direction and desire for control, and its own performance measurements, outcomes, desires, wishes, whatever. And so that means if you're getting money from us that has gone through two other governmental agencies, by default, but not really by design, but by default, you're going to end up with a contract that's going to be rather prescriptive and have a high administrative burden. So that, like, when we talk about, like, you want to attend the webinars, please attend our webinars. This is a great place to ask questions, but go forward with a critical eye as to whether or not this is a good opportunity for your organization, especially if you are a growing organization with a budget of under maybe $250,000, because chances are, you really, to be successful with our contracts, you really do need to have a full-time administrative person, if not persons. And so I always like to tell people to proceed with caution, because I want you to grow to be a $500,000 organization that's going to ace our program and is going to really handle it. And I can't do that if I put you out of business on a technicality when you're smaller. So understand, in terms of content, please read the RFP. I know they're dense. I know that they're maybe not the most exciting thing you've ever read, but they are chock full of information. And we do spend quite a bit of time crafting them and trying to be clear and accessible. And we are very interested, we have moved over the past few years to really stress trying to keep these RFPs out for 4 weeks at the minimum. 6 weeks is ideal. I would love to have them out for 8 weeks, quite frankly. But until I am queen, I'm queen of RFPs, but I'm not queen of my department. So, until that happens, I don't know about the 8 week out on the street. But we want to have you have the time to be engaged in the RFP, have some time to set yourself up for success. And so, ask questions. And I do tell, in the webinars that I give, I talk excessively, I think, about setting yourself up for success, so that, part of that is understanding if you're a good fit with this funding stream and what we're looking for. And the other thing is giving yourself enough time to do a good job. Now, I was a highly mediocre I was just a highly mediocre student for the most part. And one of the things I learned, just before I graduated, was that asking for extensions and turning stuff in late was never because I was turning in my best work, So start early, as I say, save often, but start early, set yourself up for success. Try to get this, let stuff write whatever you want and then let it percolate a little bit and then come back to it because you're going to do a much better job. So that would go to the second. Let's go to the next slide about following directions. I can't tell you, strictly following application directions and responses. I know sometimes our application questions are a little verbose or complex. But if you have first of all, a lot of the keywords and direction in as to how to do a good answer are embedded in the RFP document. So reread that RFP document or call the program people. There is a program person assigned to every RFP that is like, it is their job to answer your question about like, I don't really get this. Can you explain what you want or what you mean here? And then also submit all the requested materials. Like all of my RFPs, I don't know what health does, but all of my RFPs, there's a checklist saying like, did you upload this? Did you upload that? Like, and if you have a problem, call me. Again, if you start early, you have time to call me and you have time for me to respond. Don't call me at 11:45, and plenty of people do. But just follow directions. I can't even, and as hard as it is, really try to engage with the questions. We all know that you're going to have a body of written materials that you have saved from other applications. That is super cool. Do a spell check and don't leave the previous ask's name in there. That would be, like I've seen that a lot. Like it's a harmless mistake. And actually at some point I don't really care. I just think it's sloppy. That's all. Make sure that you read the question really carefully and that your response aligns with what we were asking. Because a lot of times we'll ask a question that maybe is like slightly different than whatever your last funder's application was asking. And so we get that response and it's just not like good enough to get you full points. Because the way we evaluate is like every question has a point value assigned and then we go through and we have a rubric and it's like, 5 points for this, 8 points for that, 3 points for that, like to get full points, you actually need to actually answer the question asked, not a similar answer to the question asked. And then, talked about submitting all the requested materials. So then we're going to go, the next 4 really talk about like, what do you say in your answer? And so write detailed yet succinct responses. Again, this goes back to start early. Stay within the word limit. Our e-procurement system caps you at 4,000 characters, which includes spaces and punctuation. And, just to make it tricky, it won't count for you. It will just cut you off and it won't tell you that it's cutting you out until like you've already submitted the thing. Like it's just a mess. But here we are in this environment. Do your application. You also can't really save a workable or manipulatable version of the application in the e-procurement system. So and I say this to the webinars, do everything offline, do it in whatever word processing you like that will count the characters for you. So you know that it's not going to cut you off just when you're getting to your final triumphant sentence. Like in terms of responses should include a broad summary of the variety of work the organization has done or plans to do. Yeah, I think that's probably a good, unless sometimes our questions are really specific. So don't talk about a broad summary if the question is like basically, what were you doing last Tuesday at 3:30 a.m.? That's not a broad summary question. Just answer the question. And then it's the old adage about like writing, which is like, you should really show, not tell. So and this kind of goes into that showcase expertise and knowledge of the space and show me or tell, show me what you have done, use facts, use examples, really engage or, I hate to say it like this engaging stuff because I know that engaging takes energy and it takes time. And that's like something that's in pretty short supply if you're in the NPO environment. But to do a good application, to really demonstrate what your organization is capable of, you need to kind of carve out that space, both intellectually and, like I hate to say it, emotionally, hopefully not physically, to really craft a good answer that's engaged. I can't even tell you how many, how many kind of rote answers we read. Most of them do, to the degree that when you can get like a C+ or a B- out of us for the most part, depending on how many people have applied to the RFP pool by just giving us rote. But it is like those great engaged answers where somebody really like got into writing the application or telling me about what they're doing. Those are quite frankly, those are the ones that you're just like, oh, I love this organization. I love this person. I love this writer. Like we aren't robots. Like we do read this and we do remember a really nicely written application. And Lord knows I've looked at enough of them. And then, yeah, like programmatic and financial steps or specialists and experts in the space, or they partner with external experts, data-driven understanding. I mean, we love it if you can provide data. You can if you've done the data yourself, even if it's more anecdotal, as long as you tell us it's more anecdotal, like, the sample size was 20 or whatever, that's great. We love that an evidence of the point of reflections, including a clear statement. Yeah, the program, if you if you have questions, like go to your program people, if they exist in your organization. Don't be afraid to engage our program people. And if you have the minute to do a little research as to how whatever it is you're doing might align with a trend, either locally or regionally or nationally, go for it. Like we love to see that kind of higher, quote unquote, higher order thinking. At the city of Chicago, we do, by the dint of our size and kind of our mission, we do transfer between the big picture and the little picture frequently. And so we always like it when we see evidence of somebody else being able to follow along on that. That's the most of the people I work with, if not all, are really devoted to working here and to the practice areas that they are engaged with. And so we always love it when somebody demonstrates that they too, have a passion for that. Now, that being, the qualifying being that most people who are working in nonprofits are that way. We love it when there's evidence of, where there's written evidence of that, because lots of people, many people can run an awesome program. Not everybody can write about an awesome program, and that's where the crux comes in. And then in terms of the last thing, this is highlight community partnerships and support. We almost always ask about partnerships. We almost never hear very much about partnerships. But I know a lot of our programs really can't work, or they're not going to work as well unless you are engaged in the community space that you're operating in. And that would include engaging with a number of other organizations that are similarly or supportively, engage, like aligned with whatever it is that your organization is doing. So I don't know, Mary, if there's other things that you wanted to comment on in terms of these best practices, or Altha, if you're still here, if there were things that you might want to share in regards to what I just said. But if not, then I don't know, I'll turn it back to Bea.
Julie, I was just going to say, I think you covered a lot of the key points. The one thing I would say, though, is that when you're responding to an RFP, you should engage the organization and the key stakeholders. It's because typically what I have seen is usually the organization's executive director is responding to the RFP, but I think it's important to speak to the administration and your financial person to make sure that you're including all the necessary detailed information, and that it'll be sustainable. And again, I think Julia mentioned it, like you should allow several hours, many hours to respond to an RFP.
Awesome. All right, with that, we can hear you, but it's a
Altha,
little.
Did you have something you wanted to share as well, Altha?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. I think you covered it all, Julia. I would just like to say that assume that the city knows nothing about your organization. I think a lot of times the mindset is that you already have my information and you already know me. You have to assume that the city does not know, because the person who's looking at your proposal may not be familiar with your organization. And even if you respond to one RFP, it should never have any bearing on any other RFPs. All individuals. So just assume we have no word, we don't know anything about your agency. We take it from that perspective. I think it helps to say someone who is reading this may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to reiterate, because it was a little fuzzy for me on my end as well, just remember that the city and whoever's reading it does not know you as much as you may think that they know you. So tell your story, share and highlight everything that you can. But with that said, next in the slideshow, actually, we also have the 5 common mistakes. And I don't know if that's Mary's or Julia's portion of the slides, but I will pause and let it be.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary O'Connor. I'm Deputy Commissioner with the Department of Planning and Development, and I oversee the Small Business Advocacy Division. And then in addition, to the Small Business Advocacy Division programs, I manage 3 of the Chicago Recovery grant programs. So we manage the Corridor Ambassador, the public outdoor plazas, and later this year we will releasing an RFP for commercial corridors. So I think it's clear, I think why we are hosting this today is because the city wants to broaden its relationship with our non-for-profit organizations. We want to work with them. But these partnerships begin with like the submittal of your application and the confidence we have based on how you responded to the RFP. And we understand that it can be very overwhelming and intimidating to respond to an RFP. So we wanted to today like cover some of the mistakes, at least I've recognized in the responses I've seen to the RFP. So one of the issues we have seen is the, I'm sorry, just give me 1 second. Just trying to get my bearings here. I think it's like incomplete or irrelevant answers. So, so we talked about that, that when the city like issues an RFP, they want to have want to go into a partnership with the organization to achieve a common goal. So, and I mentioned this earlier when we were talking, like it's got to be a team effort. You got to make sure you include all the right people in your organization to read over this RFP and to make sure that you include all the relevant information. So sometimes like some people like so we often have outside evaluators who are subject matter, who are subject experts reading over your RFP. And if you don't complete the RFP, or if they're irrelevant answers, well, then they don't have the confidence that you have the ability to be good partners in being able to execute these projects. So I think it's really important that you read, like you go through each answer and submit like necessary documents. So often they'll ask you for your financial statements or the last 3 years of your organization's tax returns. You need to make sure you submit it so that we understand that you have the capacity to partner with us. If they ask you, if they talk to you about in the RFP, if it says to you like, we are targeting commercial corridors, and your RFP response is that you are talking about residential, well, then that will impact how they score your application. So just make sure that you go through it, you take the time, you read each question and do your best to respond, as clear and concise as possible. So let's get to move to the next slide to the budget. So typically our budgets are reimbursable grants, which means that the organization is responsible for payout of the expenses up front. And then those expenses are submitted to the city for reimbursement. So often like I said, the organization's executive director is responding to the RFP, but it's really important that you talk to the financial person from your office and have them review the budget to make sure that you aren't overlooking any item, and that your budget is sustainable. And you need to make sure that your budget is realistic. You don't want to put the agency at jeopardy. So typically in a budget, like there's a template and it'll identify 5 categories for expenditure. So it could talk about like operations, your salary, professional and technical services, equipment. These are guidelines to help you give as much detail as possible in listing what you see your expenses being for that budget. And creating an accurate budget is like key of being, to being successful. Another thing I've seen is often, let's say a grant is for 200,000. Sometimes an applicant will put in a budget that exceeds over, 500,000, but doesn't note like what other source will accommodate this overage in their budget. So then we see that as a gap and seeing that again, this might not be sustainable. So make sure that your budget is very detailed and clear, and that you're not overlooking it, because later on, if you submit it for an expenditure that was not listed in your budget, it won't be reimbursable. We could go to the next one, lacking a clear and planned strategy. So as I talked to you before, we have subject matters that are looking at your application or your submittal, and they evaluate on the strength of your application. And these, in an effort to be fair to all applicants, the responses with the highest total scores will be able to be moved forward through the process. So we need to hear from the organization your clear vision, and you need to outline the steps on achieving it. And so you have to be really clear of what your timelines are, what the milestones are. You have to show a very detailed scope of work. So you want to talk about what the staff, the staff will be involved to achieve these goals. So you need to demonstrate that that you understand the request of this proposal and the mission of we're trying to get there, and that you understand the complexities of achieving this goal. So you gotta, again, I ask you to work with your other team members to go through it go through it step by step. Take the time to work on this. Go back to it in a day or so, but really go step by step and think about the full scope of that work and all the people that would be needed to be partners to have a successful application. So I'll use for an example, we did the public outdoor plazas, and we talked about design and build out. So some of the things you would need from that is you would want a general contractor to help build out. You would want an architect to talk to you about design. You talk about your programming capacity and how you would program this for a period of time. You would mention you would take into consideration that you would need landscaping, electricity, and all these different things. You want to put a clear plan in place that you understand what this would entail. So you don't want to speak general. You want to be very detailed on your plan and strategy. Next, please. The next slide, please. So the evaluators are different for every RFP. And so, as you know, I've mentioned several times, there's subject matters. So you need to it's like your response needs to stand alone. You really need to take the time to sell your organization and have it stand out, you know, to others. So you want to be able to articulate what you're trying to get across, or it could be detrimental to you moving forward, because the organization won't have the confidence based on how you answer these, you know, how you respond to this RFP. And then for last minute submissions, all RFPs are due at 11:59 a.m., not p.m. And you need to, you know, I would advise that you should be submitting these submitting your response the day before. Do not wait. And that has to go through our iSubmittal process or iSupplier. If you cannot email us, you cannot fax us. The only way you can submit this application is through iSupplier. We have no way of adjusting or helping you at that time. So I really advise you not to wait till the last minute. So many people have called us at 10 to 12 and saying, like, we're having difficulty getting in. There is nothing that the department can do at this time to assist you. The iSupplier, if you are not already a vendor, prior to that, you need to set yourself up as a vendor, and that could take 5 to 7 days before you're approved. So I encourage you to do that immediately as well. If you have questions prior, you know, feel free to reach out to us, but do not wait till the last minute. iSupplier also offers many training classes, so take advantage of that. Something, you know, I was going to go back for a minute because it made me think of, like, you know, like when you're responding to the RFP and incomplete or irrelevant answers. I've also noticed where some people feel like these RFPs may seem familiar to other RFPs they've responded to, and they've copied and pasted. Do not do that, because because it becomes apparent at certain places that it doesn't line up with all the questions and that are asked. So do not copy and paste from other RFPs. Julia, do you have anything you wanted to jump in on?
You really covered a lot, it all. I guess I would say in terms of like the incomplete irrelevant answers section, I would definitely avoid circular logic. I see that a lot in, you know, don't, in terms of like, when you're answering a question, don't restate the question more than, you know, the first sentence. And then avoid the circular logic. I see a lot of like, it's not enough. It's usually circular when you just don't have enough detail. So it's like, we do X because we do it. And I get a lot of answers that are some variation of like, well, we just do it, you know? And it's like, no, just like break it down to me, going to your comments about like how you shouldn't assume familiarity with the work or with your organization. You know, like, I appreciate that we're all such close friends, but in the end of it all, don't, you know, like this, well, we always have done it, you know, like that's not really an answer. You gotta, you know, pretend that I'm from your reader, your evaluators from Mars, and describe what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it, or why it should be funded by the Martian, you know. So that would, you know, that would be one thing. And then again, you know, just give yourself time and space. In terms of the stuff that you were saying about the budgets, make sure we have a standard budget form that we have everybody fill out. Don't put your stuff in the share column, because I had somebody do that. once, and it was very difficult, weirdly enough, to fund them when they put their entire budget in the share column. So it looked like they were charging the city $0 for their program. And like we, obviously we knew what they had done, but it's a weirdly hard burden to have to get them to submit, and like, can you get them to resubmit? And is that it just, it just ends up being really hard. And then understand, like with us, most people do great on their personnel costs, but they get a little bit shakier on their non-personnel costs, and they either vastly over budget or vastly under budget. So to the degree that you can maybe work that stuff out. In terms of budgeting, also, I would say that generally speaking, we can give you less money. Most of the time, we're going to ask you for a 12-month budget, and we're going to use that as just like a template. That's like our jumping off point. And generally speaking, we can give you less money, but we're not necessarily going to give you more money. So, come in at what you think your costs actually cost. Like, don't pad your budget, but at the same time, don't try to don't give the city a break, because if you say I can do this for $50,000, we might come back and be like, okay, we want to do 2/3 of it. That's going to be $30,000, and that might not work. Like adjusting the size, that ratio. We're going to go with the ratio that you gave what we saw on your original budget and use that as a ratio to add or subtract. But generally speaking, we usually aren't going to be like, oh, we're going to give you more. So like make sure that your budgets really do cover your actual costs to the degree that you know what they are. Yeah, and then the last minute submission thing, don't call me at 11:45 unless you just want to talk to me, because I can't solve your problem at 11:45. All of our RFPs are due at 12 noon. There are no exceptions. And if you have a big problem, I can't solve it. I can solve your problem the day before. I can solve your problem 3 days before. I can solve your problem at 8 o'clock in the morning. 11:45, I can sit on the phone and tell you how sorry I am that you're going to miss this, while I'm simultaneously not talking to 3 other people who are calling me at 11:50 and 11:55. Good. I don't know, Alpha, do you have anything you want to add, Alpha?
Nothing further.
Well, then this is perfect timing. We have a good 15-ish minutes for Q&A. So if you haven't dropped any questions in the chat, now would be the time. I will be reading them from list of, or when have they've come in order. There have been some that have been answered already. For example, someone had asked about the high quality of answers and like how, are there any examples of successful applications? And Julia did mention that they will be looking for examples that will be shared with the Q&As, answers after the event. So keep an eye out on those. But the first question I have for folks is, can portal systems provide downloadable PDFs of all of the application questions to be reviewed in advance?
Yes, they can. I believe this was something that Ms. Velez Diaz went through in the first session. She talked about how you would go to find an RFP. And when you look at the RFP, there is you click on this PDF, and that is a PDF that you can download of all the application questions and the RFP document itself. And then in terms of, I guess, when thinking upon, just to go back to the question about providing you guys with an example of high quality answers, it is, like it's a tip, I guess. I will have to look for that answer, and I know that I will have to scrub it of like details that would make it that would protect the identity of the writer. But at the same time, I do think like it is those details that make the answer high quality. So a high quality answer is something that is both, as I talked about the big picture and the little picture, it is both something that relates to the larger picture and scope of the RFP, but provides fairly intimate details about your organization and its work. And that is what makes a really compelling, engaging, high quality answer.
All right, and the last question we have in the chat for now is, why are some, I'm assuming applications, run through submittable versus iSupplier?
I'm new. I don't have that answer. I could get it and share it later, but I don't have that answer.
We don't use submittable at all. We only use iSupplier.
I know our-
Submittable might be, is that DCase's series, DCase's platform? Do you know?
Can you, I didn't hear you, Julie. What did you say?
Is submittable the DCase platform? Because I think for delegate contracts, everybody has to use iSupplier, you know, regardless of their feelings.
I believe our community development grants from DPD might be using submittable.
Oh.
For some of some of their grants. But we could provide that answer for you.
Lovely. Well, this last question is a little bit more specific. So we do have time for it because there are no other questions, but just on a more broad scope, I'll read this out loud. It says, we keep being told that if we over deliver on deliverables, we'll be more likely to gain more funding moving forward. Although this has been my strategy for the past 7 years, we haven't been the recipient of additional funding. How do I proceed? Our community demands more of us than the city can provide funding for, and we are constantly working to provide adequate services in the neighborhood. But the city continues to pay below minimum for our services.
First of all, I guess my question would be, who's telling you that if you over deliver on deliverables, you'll be more likely to gain more funding? I mean, I think that's a common trope in the funding landscape in just generally, but I also think that's an old trope, and that any organization that lived through the state budget crisis where we didn't have a state budget for so many years, maybe got burned on this over deliverable thing. I know I have one state funder who they have a bad practice of if an organization over delivers, then they just reset the bar to that over deliver and make that the new normal. So we like it if you over deliver, but we don't like it if, we don't always have the extra money to give you for over delivering. So that's problematic. So I guess I would focus on quality over quantity if I were you. And I don't know who's giving you that message, although that is I think a common trope in the world of nonprofits and maybe private funders. But if you haven't been recipient for additional funding in 7 years, I guess I might consider giving up that idea.
Well, the city has limited funding for grants, and they may not have the additional funding to compensate for for the organizations to give them additional funding. But I think they often ask them to do some, outside fundraising in addition to so it supplements the grant that the city is offering.
Oh yeah, we've tried to as a department, we've tried to move away from that model, although it was something that we saw with our federal funders that all of a sudden they were like, hey, we know this program costs $500 to administer. We're going to give you $500 the first year, $400 the second year, and $250 the third year. And as part of your application, we want you to tell us how you're going to make up funding. And that's, the answer, as perhaps the question asker has found out, is the plan is we're not there isn't, what do you think? I can't get money from a rock, I have to say, I'm really sorry that this is happening to you, because this makes me really angry and sad in terms of, and on the other hand, I know every community is going to demand and ask for more than anyone can provide. When you get into the world of social services, at least, demand is infinite, and unfortunately money is not. And then it's also, some of the solutions are also in progress. But in terms of if the city continues to pay below minimum for your service, I would figure out what the right amount is and start putting that into your budget. Because as I said, we'll never fund you for more than you ask, but we will fund you for less. And so I would really make sure that when you ask, it's for the real cost of doing business in your, in your community. And make sure that your application questions, there's always a question in the DFSS applications about the reason, why do you feel that your costs are reasonable? So use that question to supplement why you think that whatever the increase in your costs are reasonable. Like, break it out, give us facts. Oh, our rent went up, our utilities went up. We're seeing clients who need a greater level of service. They need more touches. So our HR costs are going to be increased. Like, we cannot fund stuff we don't know about. We can't fund, we can't fund costs that are not, that you haven't explained to us. But at the same time, we're not going to read your mind and be like, hey, we know the market rate for this is $5, but you're only charging us $3. We're not going to be like, oh, I wonder why. We're going to be great. They want to do $5 worth of work for $3 worth of work. Hope that works out, So I'd say examine your costs, figure out what they are, charge us for them.
I don't currently see any other questions in the chat, but we do still have about 9-ish minutes. So I'm going to just pause and see if there are any more questions. But with that said, if not, we could always end this session early as well. All right, so I do have some questions where folks are talking about iSupplier. Someone mentioned they don't really talk about grant opportunities being on iSupplier, and now someone is asking, what is iSupplier, and can I find training on said entity?
I could put the link for the iSupplier in the training in a second.
I think Julia just dropped an online
Did
training
you?
thing about iSupplier.
In terms of the, talking about grant opportunities that don't appear in iSupplier, you have to, sometimes iSupplier will only give you 10. They'll just give you the first 10. And if you go, so now I'm looking at the iSupplier, the iSupplier thing, and it only lists 10 and they're all water management, right? So what the instructions were to click on that events column. If you click on it going up, or you can click on it so it goes up or down, and look for delegate agency. So if you click on it, so the events aspect is going down, you'll see the last 5 or 6 things are delegate agency RFPs, which would be more what maybe you were looking for. You can also do those searches by clicking on department name, or if you know the solicitation number, you can do that.
You can also sign up with each department, so when they issue an RFP, you will be on their distribution list.
That is not something that DFSS does, but you can sign up, I think, with
DPP
you guys
does.
or with CDPH.
Yeah, I just see more questions about submittable again. Someone said, or submittable is different from iSupplier, my apologies. But someone said, I think DCASE used to use submittable. Did that go away?
No, I think they're still using submittable.
And I also see a tip from someone in the chat. As an iSupplier user, it is not the most user-friendly website. Remember to save your application early and often when you're filling it out. I think for anyone who's applied for grants and any of these things, some of these sites can be very interesting. So save your work. With that said, though, I am trying to browse if there's any other questions. Everything seems to be mostly related to iSupplier, and I think has been at least addressed with that link for more training. But yes. Okay, here's one that we could probably answer before we all step away. How likely is a small nonprofit able to obtain a federal grant? That's a big question, but I think it's still very much worth asking.
I'm sorry, I don't have that answer. We've just done a few small grants right now through, so I don't have that answer.
I think that would be a very, it depends on how small the nonprofit and depends on what you're going after in terms of federal money. Is it a direct federal grant? And what the target is. I would just make sure that, as I said, just make sure that what your mission aligns with the mission or the program description in the grant really closely. Use the technical assistance that the feds will give you, and then and make sure that the target amount that you're asking for does not exceed by, say, 50% the amount of your current operating budget. So like if you have if you're small, say you're $100,000 a year, don't apply for a federal grant that has more, that's going to be more than $50,000. Make sure you have a line of credit opened up, because government doesn't pay out super quickly, and you're going to have to voucher for everything, and you're going to have to figure out how. Almost all of our stuff is reimbursement, and I think the feds are the same way. So just make sure that you are setting yourself up for success with this, and that you're both you're both have a programmatic alignment with the funding opportunity, and that administratively you are set up to weather the worst case scenario that you can come up with taking that money. But other than that, go for it.
Well, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the session, since we're going to be headed back into that main room where we do still have a little bit more content for y'all for the summit. So I hope y'all will stick around. But thank you so much, Mary and Julia, and Alpha, for actually chiming in as well. And I hope you all have enjoyed. There will be, once again, Q&As that answers and such provided after the session. So keep a lookout on that, and these slides again will be included in that as well. So thank you all again.